In this video, I'm going to show you some basic techniques like aligning and distributing layers, and then also transforming them, mainly using the free transform tool. You can see I have 4 layers in this document created, and with the move tool I can select whichever is highlighted and move it around. To switch between the layers, you know that you can either go to the layers panel or hold down the command key and click on another layer to be able to move it, or you can also use the auto select option. This was in the video about layers. I would like to take this further and talk a little bit about distributing and aligning these layers to each other. So for example, if I move one of these layers a little bit further up and I quickly want to align all the other images to the top edge of this one, I can select all of them by holding down Control or Command, make a marquee selection of all the layers, or selecting them from the layers panel by Control or Shift clicking on them. Then you can use the alignment options. So there's 6 icons here in the options bar. The first 6 is for the alignment. The next 6 icons is for distributing them. So the icons actually are quite good at telling us what they will do. So this one has a line on the top, which means it will be aligning the selected layers to the top edges. So if I click on that, that's exactly what happened. Now if I select one of these images and maybe move it further down, then I move the other also further down and this one further up. Now if I select all 4 of them again and I use the second icon, that is going to do align vertical centers, which will find exactly the center of these 4 images, and it will align all of them in there. The same would apply for aligning to bottom edges, and then we also have the same for left, right, and center in case you are working with images in a column, so on top of each other instead of next to each other. So that is alignment options. And then we have distribute options. Now for distribution, I would like to show you this option, which is the most common one, the distribute horizontal centers, in case you have your images next to each other, because that will help us to make even space between these 4 layers. So currently you can see it's not even. So I have a bigger gap there, I have narrow one here, and a medium gap there on this side. So if I click on the icon I just showed you, that will distribute the spacing between these layers. If I wanted to put these 4 images on different levels and I want to make sure that the vertical distance between them is increasing with the same pace, I could also do that. So for example, I select this one, move it down, select that one, move it up, and then this one further up. Now if I select all 4 of them once again, first I would use again the same option, so distribute the horizontal centers, and then I can use also this one, distribute vertical centers, which will have an even vertical distance between each of them. So once again, that was before, which is uneven, and then we even that out also by using the distribute option. But let's align them back to the center points, and let's talk about transformations. There is an option here to show transform controls, which can be useful. This will give you a bounding box on whatever layer is selected, and this will always show whenever you have the move tool selected. So if I select the couple layer, for example, you can see we have a bounding box around it, but if I control or command click on the other layer, that will have the box around it. If I select 2 layers together, we will have the box wrapped around these 2 layers. With these control points, I can resize these layers. So by dragging any of these points, you can see I can already do a change on the size of them. But notice that by default, this is going to distort the images. So to be able to keep the original proportions, you have to remember to hold down the Shift key. So Shift, click and drag, and then let the mouse go first, and then the Shift key to make sure that you don't mess up the proportions. But don't forget to also accept the transformation. Once you prefer the new size, you can click on this tick here on the top or press Enter. This function is actually the Edit Free Transform option. So if you don't have the Show Transform controls on, and you have a layer selected that you want to change in size, you can also go to Edit Free Transform, or remember Control or Command T, which is the shortcut. So there are many ways to get to the same option, but remember holding down the Shift key when you are changing the size, or instead of using the Shift key, if you don't like shortcuts, you can also use this chain here on the options bar, which will maintain the aspect ratio. So if you click on that before you distorted the image, then using one of the corner points, you can also maintain the proportions. Just don't forget to use a corner point, because if you use one of the side points, you can still mess up the proportions. If you created a transformation that you don't want to use, click on the cancel icon or press escape. That way you revert back to the original size before your transformation. When you are in free transform mode, you won't be able to do anything else apart from transforming your current image. So you won't be able to select other layers, you won't be able to access any of the options from the menus. That's because you are in a special editing mode. It's similar to like type editing, or whenever you have a selection, you are also slightly restricted in the options you can choose. I will talk about selection soon as well, but for now, we are in the transformation mode, and it's good to know that you can also do other things than just simply resizing with the free transform. You can rotate as well. If you go close to a corner point, just click and drag and start rotation. If you hold down Shift key while rotating, you can do this with 15 degrees increments, either clockwise or anti-clockwise. And once you are ready with your rotation, you can press Enter to accept. The only problem, once you rotated an image, is that next time when you use the free transform option, so if I go back to Edit Free Transform or turn on the Show Transform Controls, you will see it doesn't wrap around the original edges of my layer. It's going to have an estimated bounding box now. So if I start rotating again, it will start as a new rotation. It doesn't remember the original angle. So it actually will make it difficult to set it back to the original 0 degrees angle, so to keep it straight. So what I do sometimes, if I know that I want to go back with rotation, so if I'm not sure whether I wanted to rotate something, before I do the rotation, so I just undo my previous steps. So before I do my rotation, I right click on the layer somewhere around its name and then choose Convert to Smart Object. You can also go to the layer menu and then choose Smart Objects, Convert to Smart Object, which adds this small icon on the layer's thumbnail, meaning that now this is a smart object layer. This is a special type of layer, which I'm going to talk about in more detail later on. But for now, all you need to remember is that if I rotate this layer, I already see it slightly different because in free transform, I have a big cross or X on top of my layer. Once I click on the tick to accept this transformation, and I go back to free transform mode, so I choose Edit Free Transform, you see that will remember the original bounding box. And on top of that, I can even change the angle back here in the options bar to 0 degrees. And that way I can quickly reset the rotation. So the smart object is much smarter than a normal layer in that sense. But there's also another big advantage, and that is it preserves the current pixel amount of the layer. Which means if I resize this layer and then resize it back up again, I won't lose quality on it. So let me just demonstrate that to you and compare these two layers here. I'm going to turn off the Show Transform Controls, but I select these two, the searching and the smile layers. And then using the Free Transform tool, I'm going to make them really tiny. So something like that, 100 pixels height. I accept the transformation. And then I use the free transform again. So I just keep pressing Command T or Control T to get back to it. But you will see what happened is that on the image on the right, we don't have any detail from the original size. We only had that small amount of quality or resolution that was left after reducing its size, while the one on the left managed to recover all the information from the original size. When I press enter to accept the transformation, it actually tries to improve the image on the right, but of course it will never be able to recover the original details. So that's why also smart objects are very useful. Well, of course, it will only preserve the current pixel amount, so it won't be able to produce higher resolution images than what you start with. And really the only disadvantage to smart objects is that they are not raster layers, so you can't draw directly on them. And they slightly increase the file size as well. Of course, depending on the amount of smart objects and the size of them, your file size can actually be much bigger than if you just use normal layers. So there are drawbacks, but as I said, I'm going to talk a little bit more about smart objects in another video. But for now, let's continue what else we can do with the free transform tool. So let me just select this image here once again. And I'm going to select the free transform option by pressing Command T or Control T. And then once we have that open, I'm going to just make this slightly bigger and then choose this option here on the top, which is the warp mode. So this will switch between the transform and warp modes. Once I enter warp mode, it looks again slightly different. I can drag any of these points around, and you can see we can create warping on the image. So using these points, we can distort the image, the edges, but we can also click around the edges within the image to create something like this. For example, you can bend it in every direction, and you can also click in the middle to bend those points or warp those points around. You can even adjust the angle of these curves and create even S-curves by adjusting these handles on the top. And there are also some default shapes for the warping. If you click on the custom option in the options bar, you can choose arc, for example, and you can choose arch, and so on and so forth. Whenever you choose one of these default shapes, then you can use this icon to change the orientation. So you can swap whether it's vertical or horizontal bend. And then, of course, you can also adjust the amount of bend. So you can refine that. And after a while, it's going to go the other way as well. So if I drag it in minus direction, then it will bend the image that way. On top of bend, we can also increase and decrease other distortions like horizontal or vertical distortions. And when you are ready with the warping of the image, you can click on that icon again to switch back to the normal transform mode once more. So let me make this once again a little bit smaller, and then I'm going to select this other image here, because there's another feature as well when you are using the free transform tool, and that is using the command or control key. It is called distort if you just use one of the corner points, or it's called skew if you use it on one of the side points. And if you hold down Control, Alt, and Shift together, that's when you can do perspective distortion. Depending where you move the mouse, you will get different distortions. So either just command, click and dragging, depending on whether it's corner point or side point, you will get different effect. And with command, Alt, Shift, or Control, Alt, Shift, you get the perspective distortion. While you are in free transform mode, you can also quickly flip the image horizontally or vertically if you extend one of the edges beyond the original edge. So I can drag it all to the other side, and you can see it's getting flipped. But maybe a better image to show that would be this one here. So using the free transform tool, I can start dragging one of its side and drag it onto the other side. Or if I hold down the Alt key, it actually keeps its center point while I'm doing this transformation. The only problem by doing this technique is that you will again distort the image and it won't keep its original aspect ratio. So I'm going to press Escape, and instead of doing it like this, I normally go to the Edit menu, Transform, and then choose Flip Horizontal or Flip Vertical if you want to turn it upside down. Notice that I have my custom shortcuts assigned to these options as well, so I can access them faster. But let's see Flip Horizontal, and that does exactly what we expected. So that's all I wanted to show you in this first video about transformations. But In the next video, I will show you some advanced techniques like the puppet warp and the perspective warp, which was introduced in Creative Cloud.